Welcome to this side event, Victims in an International Context. My name is Léa Mindre-Chautran. I'm working at VSE as a policy officer, and I will be moderating today's event. So we all know that victims face greater challenges in cross-border situation. They might not speak the language, they might not know the legal system that they face in another country. Their family, friends might not be present to support them just after something has happened to them. VSE has been increasingly active for cross-border victims in the past years, and especially since the terrorist attack in France and Belgium 6 and 7 years ago. We have developed our own terrorism response network to support victim support organization, governments, but also victims, to ensure that all victims, foreign and national, receive the right information and the support they need. We have also developed our own cross-border referral system, which allow our members to refer victims in cross-border cases from one country to another. So today I'm really happy to present you our three excellent speakers that will give you more information on the challenges faced by cross-border victims and how different victim support organizations support victims in different contexts, be it in terrorist attack trial or when traveling abroad. So we will start with a presentation from Pat Mullaney from ITAS, the Irish Tourist Assistance Service, and he will present us the specific needs and challenges faced by international visitors experiencing crime, their rights, and also ITAS experience in helping them. And we will also then later on hear from Isabelle Sadowski and Pauline Okroglik from France Victimes, and they will present us the French model for trials of terrorist attack with an international dimension. So I'll just give a short presentation of Pat. He has been working at the Irish Tourist Assistance Service in different roles over the last 6 years. He has accumulated a wealth of knowledge of the problems and issues faced by international victims coming to international visitors, coming to Ireland, who have been unfortunate enough to be victims of crime. He has worked assiduously with partner organizations in law enforcement, travel accommodation, legal and diplomatic service to mitigate as much as possible the effects of crime and to ensure that victims get the best service possible to allow them to either carry on with their visit or return home safely. In his time with ITAS, Pat has dealt with the full range of cases ranging from low-level theft to cases of serious assault and trauma and everything in between. So Pat, the floor is yours. You can share your screen and start your presentation. Thank you very much.
Are you seeing my screen at the moment?
Not yet. I think you might need to turn on your camera to share your screen.
Okay, just bear with me.
Let's try. Otherwise, I can share it for you.
Are you seeing it now?
No. It doesn't seem to work.
Sorry about that. I'm just not getting the.
What I suggest is that I can share your presentation and you can just tell me next slides.
Yeah, if you wouldn't mind. For some reason, it's not. I'm not getting the option to.
It's no problem. Let's do it like this.
Okay. Okay, so sorry about the technical hitch there, folks. My name is Pat Mullaney, as was mentioned, and I'm the service manager at ITAS here in Ireland. And this presentation is looking at the needs and challenges faced by international visitors experiencing crime. And without further ado, just to get into some of the top level stuff, the top level challenges that kind of people in these kind of situations face. Isolation is probably the first one we come across. A lot of people who would travel here may travel on their own, and if a crime happens, then they have no friends or family as a network to fall back on. Another challenge may be language difficulties. Most people, or many people that come to Ireland, speak English, but not many people in Ireland speak, say, French or Spanish or Italian. The chances of you finding one on the street or whatever are pretty low at the particular time that you need them. Even with people who are fluent in English, there's a lot of local accents and idioms that we use that wouldn't be familiar or wouldn't be taught in language colleges or language classes throughout the world. Technical issues can be a problem. Because of the EU's action in terms of roaming charges and that over. Sorry, I moved on to the next slide. Thanks. Sorry. Technical issues can become an issue, as obviously they have for me today, for people who visit. The EU have done quite a lot of work over the last number of years in reducing roaming charges for people traveling within Europe. But our American friends from North America, from Canada, from the US often have fairly expensive data plans that really cost them a lot of money when they travel in Europe. Access to the internet, for example, could be a problem. About 10, 15 years ago, internet cafes were quite popular in Ireland. In the street just around the corner from where I live, there would have been 4 or 5 at one stage. At the moment, there's 1, and I'm not even sure if that's going to open after the pandemic ends. And it's basically down to the proliferation of phones. People are able to access the internet on a phone now, so you don't necessarily need to go to an internet cafe for any period of time. Cultural shock is a very wide and broad challenge that people may face. It can cover a gamut of various different experiences, everything to do with how various institutions are presented. If I walk down the street here in Ireland, I'll automatically know where a post office is, or I'll know it by the signage. But if I come from a jurisdiction where the signage is completely different, then that's I'm not going to recognize the building as a post office very quickly. And again, then that leads into unfamiliar systems. Banking here is probably slightly different from the way it's dealt with in the rest of Europe. There may not be major differences, but yet at the same time, that can be very confusing for a visitor who's in Ireland for the first time. And again, legal differences are a bit of an issue as well. We have a common law system here, which we inherited from the United Kingdom once we were part of the same jurisdiction. And I think the legal systems in the rest of Europe tend to be based on Roman law and tend to be more adversarial, where here the focus is more or less on the crime. In the rest of Europe, there's a focus on the victim and the criminal, and it's kind of a battle as to which of them has the upper hand. So moving on to the next slide. The practical issues that victims of crime would face in a foreign country. The first one, the obvious one, is stolen passports. And in order for anybody to transfer back out of the country, a passport or an identity card is of the utmost importance. Without it, it's very difficult to fly. Stolen credit cards and stolen cash mean that you don't have access to funds for the basic necessities of life, like accommodation, food, and so on. If your flights are impending, in other words, if you're here with me on a Thursday evening and your flight's leaving tomorrow, then that's a difficulty in the sense that you need your documentation and all that to be organized and ready, and that you can take your flight when it's due. Lack of credit cards and lack of cash again means no accommodation. If you haven't already paid for it on your credit card, then without your wallet, without your passport, your credit cards and your cash, it's going to be very hard for you to get accommodation for the next night or the next 24 hours, next 48 hours or whatever. And again, that leads on to no money for food. So what do you do? Difficulty in making yourself understood. Again, that goes back to the language difficulties. You may understand perfectly what's actually happened to you, but your ability to communicate that to either law enforcement or to people who may help you on the street even, or people like me, is another practical issue that you're going to face. Next slide. And the effects of crime on a victim. Now, not really going to dwell on the first two there in any great detail, because from my perspective, or our perspective, or the way we tend to do business, our job isn't really to deal with the physical effects or really the emotional effects. We don't provide that type of service. The physical effects themselves may be anything from feeling jumpy, loss of appetite, feeling uncoordinated, and tiredness. In the emotional effects, people feel that they're going crazy. I've just had my bag taken. I'm in this strange land, and this all just sounds like madness to me. There's other things that play into that, like sadness, grief and loss, anger, irritability, feeling guilty. People feel guilty that they're the victim of crime a lot of the time. What did I do wrong? Why was I a target? What did I do to make myself a juicy target for a criminal? And basically feeling foolish because, why did it happen to me and not the guy next to me or the guy down the street or whatever? Why was it me? Am I a fool? But the cognitive effects are the ones that really present themselves to us. And when we meet people, we find it often difficult to deal with them because of all of this kind of trauma that's going on in the background. We find that they're listening to what we're saying, they're hearing us, but they're not maybe paying attention. They're thinking of the effect that the crime has on one specific area. That leads into difficulty in making decisions then, in the sense that they don't really know who can they contact. Should they contact a parent or a sibling or a friend or colleague or something like that? And it's the confusion around that that kind of slows down the pace of how quickly we can react and work with them. And that leads into slowed thinking and forgetting the details of daily life. Was I supposed to do something in the last hour? Should I have picked up something? Should I have met a friend of mine? Should I have communicated with somebody else? Should I let people know that I'm okay? All of that kind of thing begins to kind of blur into the distance a little bit, and they're focused on the kind of trauma of the problem that they now have. And the problem isn't just one problem, it's a myriad of different issues, and they're trying to juggle those all at one time. Next slide. So ITAS, what are we about and where did we come from? Back in 1994, there was a spate of thefts and robberies around the centre of Dublin City, and those happened in around July of that year. And that became a major news item, primarily because July is a quiet time of year for the news outlets, for radio stations, TV and newspapers and that. The Parliament here doesn't sit in July generally. It's a slow news day, as they say in the press. So the papers have to find something to fill pages. And this became a focus of that. And a lot of radio stations began to receive calls on that subject. Taxi drivers are ringing in, explaining cases that they've been involved in of people who had been robbed or mugged or whatever. And it gained traction. And so it was decided that something needed to be done, and basically what happened was the victim support in Ireland, a number of their members attended a forum in around 1993, and I remember, or in around 1994, and they met with the Amsterdam Tourist Assistance Service, which had been set up in 1993 in Amsterdam because they had a crime problem as well, and they learned from this initiative, and they came back and basically set up ITAS, the Irish Tourist Assistance Service. Now, the focus, I suppose, on tourist crime or visitor crime, Ireland at the time wasn't as prosperous possibly as we are today. And there was tourism played a large part in the economy, and it also contributed a lot of money to the economy in ways that maybe foreign multinationals didn't. The people employed were local, the money was going back into the local economy, the employers were local, they were buying supplies from local vendors, and in the whole economic chain, there was little pieces of money being distributed right through the system where, as I said, foreign multinationals may come in and manufacture computers, but the component parts may come from Asia or somewhere like that. And there isn't the same effect or impact on the economy that tourism had. A lot of young people kind of start out life by getting part-time jobs in hotels and catering and that kind of thing. And all of these kind of things were important to the economy and important to the way the country saw itself. And at one stage, I think we became a country that the US advised against traveling to. And that was partially major embarrassment, but it was also something that could impact our economic growth and development and the development of society in the country down the line. So next slide. So the two people involved, Derek Nally and Anne Mead, went to the conference that I spoke about. Derek was a retired Garda sergeant, and he'd been involved in a number of victim support organisations in Ireland. You know, from his background on Garda Síochána, the police force here, and he had come up with the idea, attending the conference, something needed to be done, and an organisation or a support system needed to be built up to support victims of crime who were visitors to the country who had immediate requirements that needed to be dealt with in a short period of time. And Mead, who's another founder of ITAS, was involved in a number of different victim support organizations at the time, and she took it on board to kind of set up the organization and to coordinate the early kind of steps, the early stages of the organization. Now, you might see there that she has an MBE, which is a member of the British Empire. It's an award from the Queen. We have been lucky in the last number of years that Anne was awarded an MBE, and my predecessor in the role that I'm in at the moment got an award from the Italian government, which is the Order of the Star of Italian Solidarity. Now, don't ask me to say that in Italian. My Italian's not that good, but we've just received a notification recently that another of our volunteers, Bernadette Kelly, is also to be awarded the Order in Solidarity. That kind of had on Ireland and Italy, for example, the has that also that Anne's MBE recognises the work that she's done over the years to contribute to a better sense of feeling and solidarity between nations. You know, in her work as a coordinator with both ourselves and the other victim support organisations that she was involved in. Next slide. Okay, so the Irish Tourist Assistance Service, we were founded in 1994. We're a specialist service that offers immediate practical support and assistance to tourists who are victimised while visiting Ireland. And the important words there are immediate, practical, and assistance to tourists. We don't provide counselling, we don't provide long-term support. Most of our cases are probably dealt with in a couple of hours to maybe a day. Some of them may go on for 3 or 4 days, but the bulk of them are within an hour to 1 day that we have a resolution or some solutions for people in that short time frame. One of the things we offer is a base from where all issues facing the tourist victim in the aftermath of a crime can be addressed with a view to resolution. And this is important because a lot of the tourists that come to us through An Garda Síochána, the police force. And if you've ever been in a police station anywhere in the world, it's not the ideal kind of place to do stuff that you need, like contact an embassy or an airline or do any of that kind of thing. It's noisy. There's a lot of people there. Some of the people there are possibly the people that may have actually robbed you. So we have an office that I'm in at the moment. We also have a sub office which is based in Pearse Street Garda Station in the centre of Dublin City. And Dublin City would be a large focus for us, and that a lot of cases would come from the centre of the city. It's the biggest city in the country. We get a lot of tourists in. They fly into Dublin first of all before visiting the rest of the country, or they come into the country and they travel to Dublin, and you know they spend a night or two in Dublin and then leave. So in terms of a base where things can be done, we had a situation a number of years ago that I was involved in a case where we had a lady come into us. She was a German citizen and she'd been friendly with an Irish woman from sometime in the late 40s or early 50s. And unfortunately, the Irish lady who she was friendly with was now in a hospice for the dying. And this German lady had come to visit her. And when she left the hospice after visiting her on a wet and dreary November Sunday, She walked down the avenue from the hospice, came to the street where she could get a taxi or a bus or whatever. And unfortunately, some guy grabbed her handbag and ran away with it, and she fell to the ground basically. She was 84, and she arrived with us in the office. Now there's a lot of stuff we needed to do for her to get her back to Germany, okay, and it was a Sunday and the embassy was closed, and there was a lot of rigmarole involved in basically organizing alternative documentation for her so that she could fly out. But she was very shook when she arrived in the office, and basically didn't know what to say to us. Her friend, who was slightly younger, did most of the talking and that. But at one stage, we listened to her and we made her a cup of coffee, and we got her a taxi back to her hotel because the weather was inclement at the time. And about a week or 10 days later, I was back in the office, and there was a box in the office addressed to me. And I opened it, and it was a lot of sweets and candy and stuff like that. And there was a lovely note in there with it. And in the note, she talked about our how how we made her feel when she was in the office. And it was basically the empathy and human kindness that kind of came across. Although there was a lot of practical kind of stuff that we did, that wasn't what she remembered. She remembered the empathy and the human kindness and the quietness of the office and the fact that we listened to her. That was the impact that it had. So we aim to minimize the impact of crime on the tourists emotionally and financially. Obviously, we got her a taxi back to the hotel. It wasn't very much. We organized her documentation and so on. But as I said, it was the empathy and human kindness that really stayed with her. So tours are generally around for a limited amount of time. So our kind of thing is that it is short term, and it centers on information, for example, where the embassy is, support in terms of how you maybe get to the embassy or how you get to the airport or where you kind of stay for the night, practical assistance in the sense that we may give vouchers and that for food and for accommodation and so on. Next slide. So what do we do then? As I said, we provide a safe environment, and I'm not going to dwell any more on that. We give assistance with credit cards, and credit cards can be kind of tricky. Our North American friends tend to have multiple credit cards. Most Europeans that I know maybe have 1, 2, maybe 3 or whatever. I've come across Americans with 10, 12, 14 credit cards, believe it or not. And they take time to work through and to kind of get cancelled. Credit cards wouldn't have been a major focus a couple of years ago, but tap and go has made them a focus again. We had one particular case of a guy who hopped on a train here. His destination was probably no more than about a mile, and his credit cards were taken while he was on the train. He reported that to the Garda at about 11 o'clock. He was with us at about 11:30. And by the time he was with us, there was something like 36 transactions on his credit card, all of about 30 or 40 euro each. And that had been tap and go. And what the criminals tend to do here is they take the credit card, they'll walk into a shop where you don't have to put it, where you can tap and go to a certain amount. You don't have to put in a pen, and you can buy telephone credit and cigarettes. And the criminal then sells these on the street. So credit cards are a big focus of our time at the moment. We ensure that everybody that comes to us, if they have had credit cards stolen, that they're cancelled immediately. Embassy liaison is another area that we deal with. We're around for a long number of years now, so we're known to all the embassies, and we're not, how would I put this? I suppose the embassies know that we're not looking for anything specific from them that they can't deliver. We're just trying to ensure that their nationals are dealt with as quickly and as painlessly as possible. And we have a good relationship with the bulk of the embassies. Most of our clients would tend to come from Europe, from Germany, from Belgium, from France, and that, and from Italy. And we would have great relationships with all of those embassies. They know us very well. GP visits and advice. One of the areas that kind of we encounter from time to time is that, say, for example, a bag is stolen. It may have a prescription or it may have medicines in it. And these can be quite difficult for somebody to get if they're in a foreign jurisdiction. So we have a clinic that we use. We talk to them, we refer the injured party to them. If the injured party can get a copy of their prescription from their GP at home, that's fine. We'll print that off and give it to them, and they can go along. And usually the clinic will give them an emergency prescription for whatever length of time they need it, maybe a day or 2 days, or maybe longer in certain cases. Meals and accommodation are the next area. If you have had your wallet taken and your passport and credit cards and cash, how are you going to pay for food, for accommodation over the next 24, 48, 72 hours? We don't pay for accommodation and we don't pay for meals, but because of the nature of the work that we do, we're well supported by industry. Members of the Irish Hotels Federation have served on our board. The Restaurants Association of Ireland as well, their CEO has been a member of our board. And we have a number of hotels and restaurants on our books where we can either send people with a voucher for food. It can be anything from fast food to fairly high-end restaurants. Accommodation, again, it's everything from hostels to 5-star hotels in certain cases. Generally, we discriminate when it comes to accommodation in the sense that we're not going to send a 60 or 70-year-old lady or gentleman to a hostel where there's 3 or 4 people to the room making noise and coming in at 4 o'clock in the morning and that type of thing. And vice versa, if they're young people and they're here for the nightlife and that kind of thing, then they won't have a problem with hostels, so we may send them there. The next area then that we deal with is airline, border agency and ferry liaison. And we work very closely with the airlines here in Ireland, and the bulk of people, I suppose, traveling to the country tend to come through Ryanair, Aer Lingus. Less so with airlines maybe like Air France, KLM, and so on. But the bulk of our kind of clientele they tend to be people who deal with Ryanair. So you can be in Berlin or whatever, and you decide, hey, I'd like to travel to Ireland in November. You can get a flight for €20. You can book it now in May or June, and it's pretty cheap to travel over here. With the airlines, we have a very good relationship that in a lot of cases we can actually get people to travel back home without having to go to the embassy and get a passport. This is mainly for European citizens. I suppose the focus in the airlines, or the focus on the need for a passport and an identity card in Europe, even though we talk about the Europe with open borders, the focus on the passport isn't so much a border control thing, it's a security thing. The airlines need to be secure in the idea that they know who the person is who's actually traveling with them. In the event that something happens on that flight at a later stage and it turns out the person who said they were John Smith is actually somebody else, then that's a problem for the airline. And in a lot of cases, like I know one particular airline got fined something like, I think it was €8 million in 2019 for allowing people on with the wrong documentation. In our situation, we work very closely with the airlines. And generally what we can manage to do is that with a police report, with a call or an intervention from ourselves and an alternative form of ID, for example, a copy of a passport or a copy of a national identity card, or maybe a driver's license, we can get people back home on the flight they were supposed to go on without having to go to the embassy. And that's one of our strengths. In cases where the airline refuse that particular scenario, and they might for various reasons, generally what we tend to do then is plan B, and plan B is that we get a free reschedule of the flight. So, okay, you need to go to the embassy is not open till Monday, your flight's on Sunday night, go to the embassy Monday morning, get your emergency travel document, and you can fly out in an alternative flight free of charge on Monday. So next slide. So the practical supports, I'm not going to dwell too much on this because I've kind of referred to them in the last slide or in the last part of the presentation. Transport, where I sit at the moment and where I'm facing, which is southward, I know most of the embassies are in that particular direction. I know the French embassy, for example, is about 5 minutes walk away from here, but the German embassy is about half an hour's drive, 20 minutes or half an hour. If you've no money, no cash, no credit cards, how are you going to get there? What we do is we have a deal done with a taxi company here in Dublin, so we get free taxi journeys if we need them. Alternatively, we have Rambler bus tickets from Dublin Bus, which gives the bearer the ability to hop on and off any bus over a 24-hour period. So in a case like where somebody has to go and maybe get passport photographs done, go to their accommodation, go to the embassy, come back to our office. We may give them the the Rambler ticket, and that would allow them to get out to the airport maybe later on this evening as well, if that was a thing. Accommodation, again, without credit cards or cash, it's difficult to find accommodation. And as I mentioned earlier on, we have banks of hotel rooms, and we also have access to hostels, and that. Our only difficulty, I suppose, in that regard is that our busiest season tends to be in the middle of summer. So, you know, you're looking at June, July, August. And unfortunately for us, the tourist season is also at its busiest at that stage. I remember one Friday evening trying to book accommodation for somebody on the Friday night, and at the same time, I think Bruce Springsteen was playing in one location in Dublin. There was a heavy metal rock band playing in another venue. And on that weekend, there were two semi-finals for our hurling, which is one of our national games here. And the four counties involved in the semi-finals were all counties outside of Dublin. So you had people traveling for those games. The capacity of Croke Park, where the hurling final would be on, would be about 80,000. So you're looking at 160,000 people in those two games. The other two venues that I mentioned would have a capacity of maybe about 8 or 10,000 in one, and about 45 or 50,000 in the other. And it's also the height of the holiday season, so it was quite difficult. I think I, wore my fingers out on the phone that evening, running through numbers to kind of see if I could find accommodation. So money transfer again is difficult if you have lost your passport and your normal forms of identity. So we work closely with one Western Union agent here in Dublin. And in the event that you get money transferred, what we do is we ring ahead, we call the number of the agent, we explain to them the situation, give them the name of the injured party, and they allow them to collect the money with just the police report and without the normal forms of ID that they would request. Retail vouchers, again, I think I've touched on. We're lucky in that we've partnered with two different retail organizations over the last couple of years. And they work in slightly different areas. One is very focused on food and that kind of thing. So we get a €20 voucher from them. It means you can get a sandwich. It means you can get toothpaste, a toothbrush, various bits and bobs like that. The other one is more focused on clothes. So, underwear, baby clothes, stuff like that. We can give injured parties vouchers for those kind of things to tide them over until they get cash by Western Union, or somebody can help them, or they're traveling out of the country. Passport photos, again, if you have no cash and no credit card, how are you going to get passport photos to enable you to get an emergency travel document or a replacement passport from the embassy? We don't generally give out cash, but in certain cases like this where the injured party has no money, we pay for the photographs, and we generally bring the people along to a pharmacy to make sure that the passport photographs that they get are the correct size, because embassies, most Europeans are standard size, but the Canadians and Americans have different requirements, different ratios of the size of the photograph, and there are certain Asian countries that are in that boat as well. Next slide. Next slide. Okay, so the types of crimes. The top level, theft from the person there at 48%, that generally is the lower form of crime. It's opportunist crime, I suppose, is what you could describe it as. It's where a handbag is seen and it's just taken and the person is gone, and the injured party maybe doesn't discover that for a minute or maybe 20 minutes or an hour, that their wallet is now missing. The next part of that, then, other traumatic incidents, that's more of the kind of basic or low level assault, or somebody grabs your handbag on the street and drags it off you and runs away, and that can be anything from that to a punch been thrown, that type of thing. Theft from the car is particularly difficult for people here. A lot of the time, Americans, North Americans, Canadians come to Ireland and they rent a car. Now, for the same amount of money that I would have spent in the US, a couple of years ago renting a car, I would have got a fairly large sedan. Here in Ireland, rental car charges are quite high, and for that same money, you'd be lucky to get maybe a small hatchback like a Ford Fiesta or a Toyota Auris hatchback or something like that. And then if you've got 2 or 3 people or 4 people traveling in that car, luggage and luggage space becomes a thing. So people drive, and they drive from the accommodation they're in, they go sightseeing, they park up, and they end up leaving cases maybe in the back seat or something where they're obvious to criminals. And this poses a particular problem because the criminal will take a bag, and it may contain anything from laptops, iPads, camera equipment, right through to cash and other valuables like credit cards, passports. In a lot of cases, those kind of things are thrown away because the criminal doesn't actually want to be caught with them, but that can prove a problem in the sense of where do you find, or how do you find it? Violent crimes, then we would deal from time to time with cases of sexual assault. We work closely with the police. Sexual assault or major assault, we work closely with the police to enable them to spend time with the victim. In other words, to take statements, to get medical assessments done, that type of thing. We would generally work in those scenarios to reroute flights or to get free of charge rescheduling of flights to enable the injured party to maybe stay longer in Dublin with the police so that they can help them more in their inquiries. Burglary is a thing as well. Airbnb is a big thing at the moment. So they're targeted by criminals because they know people are transient and they're coming and going and that. And if they break in at any particular time, they may find cash or valuables, and they identify these locations and play on that. Next slide.
Pat, you have 5 more minutes if it's okay
Okay.
for you.
Okay.
Thank
Next
you.
slide. So where do we get our referrals from? The bulk of our referrals come from the Garda, the police force. We work closely with them. Sometimes the embassies will refer people to us. They may be able to replace their documentation and that, but they may not be in a position to give them accommodation or anything like that. And they kind of ask us to intervene and to work with them on that. Next slide. So just some case studies then. This is a Spanish family. A car was broken into midway between Belfast, or between Dublin and Belfast. They were hoping to fly back to Spain from Belfast, and they were taking in some sites along the way. This was fairly convoluted because we had to get them back to Dublin to the embassy. We had to get them accommodation then, and we had to work closely with the rental car company to allow them to hand over the car in Dublin. That may sound a little bit strange, but bear in mind that Belfast is a different jurisdiction, and that's the jurisdiction they nominated to hand the car back. So we would have given them a lot there. We would have given them accommodation. We would have rescheduled their flight from, moved the exit location from Belfast to Dublin, and we would have had to tie them over the 48 hours that they were with us with accommodation, food vouchers, vouchers for clothes for the children, and bits and pieces like that. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, sorry. So the next couple were a Colombian couple, and this again was a fairly convoluted case in the sense that Colombia's relationship with the United States isn't the greatest, and they need special visas to visit the US. And this couple had hoped to fly from Dublin to New York, spend about 2 days in New York, and then fly on to Colombia. Their apartment hotel was broken into, their cash was taken, credit cards were taken, and their visas were taken, and along with mobile phones and other bank cards. The Colombian embassy isn't in Dublin, it's in London, so it wasn't that easy to send them to the embassy and get replacement documentation. And in any event, they wouldn't have had the visas because they were issued at the American embassy in Colombia. So they were without any funds. So again, we had to kind of find a way of routing them out of the country. They had to kind of change their plans in the sense that they couldn't go to the US. And there's only 2 countries that allow exempt passports to be used, and they were Germany and Estonia. So we had to work with the airlines to reroute their flights free of charge through Berlin, I think, and then on to Bogota. Next slide. So the next couple then were 2 Canadian ladies who arrived in with us. What actually happened, they flew into Ireland early in Thursday morning. And because of jet lag and all of that kind of thing, they decided not to go to bed, that they were going to stay up all day and go and do some sightseeing. They went to the Hill of Howth, which is on the north side of Dublin, and it has panoramic views of Dublin Bay and Dublin City. And while they were there, they were walking up the hill. They parked their rental car in the car park there. When they came back down, the car had been broken into. Everything was gone: passports, cash, some clothes, medicines, multiple credit cards. They had one night in the accommodation they'd booked, and they were hoping in Malahide, which is near Howth, and they were hoping to travel around the country from there on. It happened on a weekend in July. It was the height of the tourist season. The Canadian Embassy don't process passports here in Dublin. They send them back to the back home to get processed, and I think they do that for every country at this stage. And it takes 48 hours from your initial appointment to the time that your passport comes back by FedEx or whatever it is. And they do a lot of checks on background checks and that, just to make sure that the people they're dealing with are the people they say they are. In this particular case, they come into us on a Thursday evening, so we'd missed the Thursday appointment kind of thing. The next appointment would have been on Friday, and as a result, the weekend broke into that. So instead of 48 hours, it was double that. They had about 10 credit cards between them, and they came into us at 5 o'clock in the evening, and we were still with them at 9 o'clock that night, dealing with the credit card side of things. One particular credit card in particular that I remember, the lady rang the number, went through the IVR. 20 minutes later, she finally gets speaking to an agent who cancelled her credit card. Her friend also had a credit card from the same credit card company and bank, and the first lady asked the agent, could she transfer the phone over to her friend to allow her to cancel her credit card? And the agent said, no, you need to come back into the IVR and go through all the security checks. So we were there for another 20, 25 minutes. So it took about 45, 50 minutes to cancel just 2 of the credit cards that they had. And bear in mind, they had 10. They had no mobile phone connectivity because roaming charges from their network in Canada were pretty high, or pretty astronomical if you were to use them in Europe. So we had to get them a SIM card from a local provider here so that we could actually make contact with them over the following days. And because it was the height of the tourist season, they ended up spending about they ended up staying in about 3 different hotels over the next 3 nights. They'd used our address in the police station as the address for a replacement credit card to be sent to us, so they couldn't really do anything until that credit card came back. So we had to keep them in accommodation, in food, and pocket money, I suppose, really, or little effects and that kind of thing for the period of that. And human kindness and empathy, I suppose, are the big kind of things. They kind of came back to us afterwards. On the first evening that they were there with us, one of the ladies said to me, I don't know about this. She said, I'm nearly seriously thinking about going back out to the airport and getting on the first flight and hopping back to Canada. And by the end of the period, or we had them till Monday, I suppose, and it was Monday their credit card arrived. By the time the credit card arrived, we had become friendly with them. There was something on in town at the time, and the superintendent in the police station was in on the Saturday for this event, and he was in full uniform and that. And because our office can be quite busy on a Saturday, I took him into another part of the station, made him coffee and that kind of thing. And he came in and he met them, and they were very impressed with his uniform. And the station that we're in has a lot of history attached to going back to the revolution in 1916, 1917, 1918 timeframe, where one of the heroes of the revolution, Michael Collins, hid out in the station. It was the head of the intelligence department of the police force at the time, and he got access to files that they had on the insurrectionists and all of this kind of thing, and they were fascinated by this. They left and they went off on their travels, and they came back to us about 2 weeks later just to pop in and say hello and that, and they were absolutely delighted with themselves, and they were able to tell people in Cork that they'd stayed or they'd been in the room where this Michael Collins had hid out to spy on the RIC and that. So it went from a situation where Thursday evening they wanted to return back to Canada on the first flight available to, they'd made new friends. They'd met this guy in an impressive uniform that they were impressed with. They'd been in the room where Michael Collins was. That's the kind of, as I said, it's human kindness and empathy is really the underlying kind of thing that kind of works with the service. We can give them the vouchers and we can talk to the embassies and all that kind of thing, but a listening ear, a calm kind of environment to work in, those are the main features. So just to give a quick heads up in terms of, this is my last slide, by the way. In terms of our partners, we've been around for a good number of years now. So The Department of Justice and the police force here are very supportive of us, as are the Department of Tourism and the tourism agency, which is Fáilte Ireland. We work closely with Dunn's stores and Pennies in terms of the vouchers that I mentioned, hotels, hostels, and that we have a large number of them on our books that we can refer people to. We get free accommodation from them. We're very close with all of the embassies. Food, again, many restaurants, anything from fast food right through to the more high-end stuff. And our travel partners, the airlines, we work very closely with them, and we have very good relationships with them, and they enable us to do a lot of stuff that, you know, people that come to us think is just magic. So that's basically it. That's us, and I hope I haven't gone through that too quickly. And
thanks a lot, Pat. This was a really informative and comprehensive presentation. I noted down a few things for questions later.
okay.
So I hope you stay with us a bit
Yeah, no
more for
problem.
the question later. Thank
Yeah,
you.
sure.
Thank you very much. So I will now give the floor to Isabelle and Pauline from France Victimes. Sorry, let me just have a look here. Yes, so from France Victimes, and they will present the case of French victims attending a trial for terrorist attack abroad and the provisions laid down in France to support these victims. We will also hear about how foreign victims are taken into account for trials of terrorist attack in France, and more specifically in light of the trial for the terrorist attack of November 13, 2015. So just a short presentation of Isabelle Sadowski. She is the legal director and victim support coordinator at France Victimes. She joined France Victimes in July 2005, and she manages a network made of 132 general victim support associations by coordinating technical support for cases related to terrorist attack, collective event, and sensitive trials. She is the link between the institutional partners and the association. And she also participates in task forces to improve victims' rights. And she is also part of monitoring committees related to victims of terrorism and to victims of terrorist attack and collective event. And she's also a member of the executive board of the Guarantee Fund for Victims of Terrorism and Other Crimes. And Pauline Okroglic is a jurist. She was a trainee for over 2 months at the European agency Eurojust in The Hague. And after that, she also studied in the United States at the University of Oklahoma College of Law. And she also interned for 10 months at the UN International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in The Hague within the Office of the Prosecutor. And she joined the Federation France Victimes in 2018. And she's specifically in charge of the European affairs, providing legal support to France Victimes Network, a victim support association, and also managing the collective event. So, Pauline and Isabelle, the floor is yours. Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Leah. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank Victim Support Europe for asking us to present the French experience in supporting victims in the event of terrorist attacks with an international dimension. Let me introduce myself. I am Isabelle Sadowski, legal director in France Victimes, and my colleague Pauline Okroglic, legal officer at France Victimes, will make this presentation with me. First, a few and very quick words about the organization of victim support in France. This mission of supporting victims was entrusted to the non-profit sector more than 40 years ago, and it is within this framework that the Federation France Victimes, INAVEM at the time, was created in 1986. Today, the France Victimes Network has 130 associations throughout France, mainland and overseas, and each year welcomes more than 300,000 victims. In order for a victim support association to intervene, there needs to be a link to France, considering this is where the associations are located. Either the victim is French or the offense happened in France, and in this case, the nationality of the victim or their relatives is not relevant. In addition to listening to and welcoming victims, the France Victim Associations carry out three main types of missions: legal information, psychological, and social support. We are a network of generalist associations, which means that we help and welcome anyone who considers themselves a victim, whatever the offense suffered: damage to people, to property. Domestic violence represents also a quarter of the public helped, traffic accidents also, and of course, victims of terrorism. In terms of terrorism, and to give you with this map an idea of the last 10 years, the France Victim Network intervened following 53 attacks between 2011 and 2021, 23 in France, and 30 abroad, involving French victims, which represented more than 10,000 people helped by the France Victim Associations. The intervention of the Victim Support Associations France Victim is part of the very precise framework, since systematically in these situations, we are mobilized by public authority, mostly by the Ministry of Justice. The Ministry of Justice at the national level requests the Federation France Victim, and the Public Prosecutor's Office mobilizes the local association in the same time. So it is important to focus in general on the needs of victims of an attack when it takes place in a country other than their own. Firstly, as regards international cooperation for victims of terrorism and their immediate and long-term needs following an attack, the majority of victims of terrorism will have a similar set of needs, whether they are in their home country or abroad. There will be 5 main needs: a need for general assistance, with medical care being a priority, a need for information, a need for someone to talk to, a sympathetic ear, a need for personalized assistance, being it legal information, psychological or social support, and a need for being recognized as a victim. But when someone is caught up in a terrorist attack in a foreign country, there is also a specific set of problems that must be taken into consideration. The language barrier. It is essential that the professional be on hand to speak to the victim in his or her mother tongue. Geographical distance in relation to their relatives. It's important that someone informs the victim's family as quickly as possible and make travel arrangements, arrange accommodation, and provide financial assistance if required. And in case of death, it is important also to inform the families and arrange to have the body repatriated. In the emergency stage, straight after the attack, embassies and consulates have a crucial role to play, that of sharing information and keeping everyone updated. After the 2017 terrorist attack in Barcelona, for instance, the French consulate had even installed in its premises, in addition to setting up an emergency telephone number, a place for welcoming French victims and their families. In the longer term, difficulties may be greater for foreign victims. First and foremost, I think there is a risk of forgetting foreign victims, which must be absolutely avoided. Foreign victims often say that they feel abandoned by their country and also by the state where the terrorist attack took place. Indeed, the time which is passing after the attack, the geographical distance, the language barrier, the lack of knowledge of the judicial system considerably increased difficulties of taking care of these foreign victims, in particular on the penal aspect, which is essential for many of them to be able to access the truth and to understand what happened. So we can say that the main needs of persons who are victims abroad are the following. First, a need for information over time on the follow-up of the file, the evolution of the procedure, results in a need for translations of the documents in the files that the victims will not understand. There is also a need for understanding the foreign system, compensation, judicial organization, and so on. For instance, after the attacks of Paris in November 2015 and in Nice in 2016, French victim support and victims associations with other institutions worked hard on this issue in order to provide assistance to the large number of foreign victims. There is also a need for practical help with the official steps. For instance, how to file a complaint when the victim returns home. Also a financial need, especially to attend the trial, and a need for assistance in the foreign country when victims go to the country where the attack took place. This help will be reassuring for them, and it facilitates their contacts with local authorities. It may be their lawyer, for example, or victim support association. In France, we have also liaison magistrates in many member states. They are French magistrates who are posted in a country for a temporary period, working in the French embassy before coming back to France. They facilitate cooperation between the two countries. For instance, for 2 trials abroad with French victims, Bardo Museum in Tunisia and London Bridge, the liaison magistrates had an essential role for the victims. Link with the foreign court, facilitator on the spot with the victims and their families, and so on. We will also find these parameters to be taken into consideration for foreign victims during the trial. The time of the trial indeed requires special attention for victims of terrorism. It is obviously a moment often awaited for a lot of them, may be feared for others, hence the importance for victims to be prepared and then supervised and accompanied by victim support professionals, regardless of the victim's nationality. So we will present the French model regarding trials of terrorist attacks in an international context in view of 2 possible scenarios. First, the trial takes place abroad, for which French victims are concerned. In this hypothesis, France has set up specific mechanisms involving the France Victim Network, so that French victims who wish to take part in the trial can do so, even if it takes place abroad, which can result in a lot of obstacles, like geographic distance, language barrier, ignorance of the legal system of the country concerned, and so on. Second, the trial takes place in France with victims of different nationalities. For this hypothesis, we will draw on the experience of the trial of the terrorist attacks which happened in France of November 13, 2015.
Thank you, Isabelle. So I will start by presenting you the model for the trials happening abroad. When a terrorist attack happens abroad, the trial usually takes place in the country where it occurred. These cases, which recently involved French victims and their families, can place victims in difficult situations. On the one hand, it results in practical difficulties because it is not always easy to be able to move abroad. The foreign country must also tolerate the presence of foreign victims at the trial. And on the other hand, it can also result in financial difficulties because these victims cannot generally benefit from the payment of their expenses in connection with their coming to the hearings, unlike the system provided by French law regarding victims' legal expenses. To explain, when a trial for a terrorist attack takes place in France, the expenses for all victims involved in the procedure, called civil parties, are covered regardless of the nationality of the victim. There was therefore an unequal treatment for French victims of an attack, depending on whether it had been linked to France, and the victims of an attack abroad. Therefore, the French Ministry of Justice has organized, along with the assistance of France Victimes and its network of associations, an exceptional system to bear the victims' legal expenses when victims have to travel abroad to attend their trial. Initiated in 2018 for the first hearing of the trial of the terrorist attack at the Bardo Museum, it has been repeated several times in 2019 and in 2020. So I'll start with the example of the trial of the terrorist attack at the Bardo Museum. As a reminder, following this attack on March 18, 2015, 4 French victims died and 48 were physically or psychologically injured. France Victimes had been mobilized by the French authorities, the Ministry of Justice, and the Ministry of European and Foreign Affairs in particular. The first hearing took place at the end of 2018, with 3 other hearings were held in 2019. And in agreement with the Tunisian justice system, and in order to allow the victims and families of French victims to attend the trial without having to go to Tunis, a specific system has been established by the Ministry of Justice. A real-time, non-interactive retransmission set up at the Paris Court of Appeal, and the covering of expenses related to the arrival of victims in Tunis or in Paris. In view of the hearings regarding this trial, the interministerial delegate for victim support has thus requested France Victimes to inform all victims and families of victims of the trial and the procedures, retransmissions, costs covered, and so on, to ascertain their wish to attend the trial in Tunis or in Paris, to accompany them during the trial, and to reimburse the costs linked to their coming to Tunis or Paris. France Victimes concluded a specific partnership with the Ministry of Justice about this action and was reimbursed for the expenses of victims after the trial. For 72 French victims or families of victims, the Federation then systematically informed each victim of the future hearing dates, collected everyone's wish to attend, either in Tunis or by video conference in Paris, organized the logistical arrangements for the victims' travel, booking plane and train tickets, drawing up a list of hotels in Paris, and so on, and make this complicated period as easy as possible for the victims by drafting an information notice regarding the bearing of costs, a quick reimbursement of the sum still due as legal expenses after hearings, a summary of the main points discussed during each hearing sent by email to all victims who wish to have this information. And we also ensured the presence and support of victims at each hearing held by video conference at the Paris Court of Appeal, and accompanied them through psychologists from the Parisian Association of our network, Paris Aide aux Victimes. In total, out of 4 hearings, 44 victims came to 1 or more hearings in Paris. A few others, much rarer, wished to make the trip to Tunis. Finally, for the verdict delivered overnight by the Tunisian justice, the information transmission was organized between the liaison magistrates stationed in Tunisia, the interministerial delegation for victim support, and France Victimes, who relayed the elements in real time by email to the victims and their relatives. An identical system was put in place for the appeal trial. This organization proposed by France was very beneficial for victims because concretely, without its existence, the majority of French victims would not have been able to follow this trial in Tunisia, no strength to travel abroad, and or no financial means either. France Victimes has been a real facilitator for victims in terms of information, support, intermediary, and post-trial care for those in demand, and also on a financial and logistical aspect. About the trial for the terrorist attack on the London Bridge. So the same modus operandi was thought out for this trial. On June 3, 2017, an attack occurred in London in which 3 people died, 8 others were injured, along with other victims of different nationalities. In view of the trial, France Victimes, in conjunction with the Interministerial Delegation for Victim Support and the Ministry of Justice, was again mandated to organize with the French families of victims and injured victims wishing to attend the trial. They're coming to London during certain periods and accompanying them there. Once again, France Victimes has carried out this drastic work, but fundamental in terms of support and compassionate and professional accompaniment for the victims and their families with regard to this hearing in London, meaning the organization of the families and victims' travels, booking their transportation, hotels, and reimbursement afterwards of the costs incurred, on a principle similar to that of legal expenses for hearing in France. The presence of the French victims at the coroner hearing in England was discontinued because they wished to attend only certain parts of the debates which concerned them, which therefore increased their trips to London and impacted the entire organization that ensued. We also led a crucial mission of support for the victims with regular contacts with each of them, informing them in terms of reports of hearings for which they were not present. A representative of the Federation also went to London at the opening of the trial, and this presence was really reassuring and structuring for the families and victims. Also, we developed a close partnership links with the French liaison magistrate in London and the French judicial authorities as a whole. A relay was also operated with the French victims residing in London to communicate to them all information regarding the trial. At the end of the trial, connections between families, victims, and local associations were created or renewed, in particular for psychological support, and sometimes also for explanations of the compensation process via the Guarantee Fund in France. As I said, this work was particularly phenomenal for this attack, but above all, it went beyond the framework of the traditional missions of the Federation and the victim support associations. Indeed, we can wonder if it's up to us, the Victim Support Network, to book transportation and accommodation in London for the families. These requests are multiplying more and more. In October 2020, France Victimes was again requested by the Ministry of Justice to organize a similar mechanism for the French victims of 2 attacks that occurred in Mali in 2015 through the reimbursement of their legal expenses and psychological and logistical support during the 2 days of broadcast of the trial at the Paris court. Each time, France Victimes has carried out this mission without hesitation to facilitate the procedures for victims and extend a hand to them, but it was fundamental to be able to frame things legally. This has been the case since the law of December 24, 2020, regarding the European Public Prosecutor's Office and Specialized Criminal Justice, which created 2 mechanisms intended to facilitate victims' access to certain hearings, terrorism and collective events, and so on, especially when there is a very large number of civil parties. The first relates to trials in France, to access the trial remotely. We'll talk about this later on. And the second relates to trials abroad, to allow the presence of French victims to tribunals abroad when they wish to attend the trial. Its Article 8, for instance, provides for a new mission now given to the Guarantee Fund, which is providing financial assistance for certain offenses to victims summoned to a trial which takes place abroad, therefore applicable to trials of a terrorist attack abroad. From now on, the travel costs bore by victims who go abroad to be present for the trial of a terrorist attack will be covered by the Guarantee Fund for the time of the trial. It involves financial assistance for travel expenses, compensation for appearance, and a daily subsistence allowance as if the trial had taken place in France. Granted, the Guarantee Fund is not necessarily delighted with this new mission, which is also somewhat outside of the scope of its traditional actions to compensate victims. And this new organization has yet to take effect, so I don't have any feedback to give you as of today. In any case, what should be remembered is that French law is now also concerned with the expenses for its nationals who are victims of terrorism with a hearing abroad, which is essential for victims who often feel even more abandoned, more quickly forgotten because the facts took place far away. The right to participate in one's trial is thus very broadly recognized in French law in the event of a terrorist attack.
So we will speak about trials in France involving foreign victims. Here, we will start from the presentation of the preparation for the trial of the attacks of November 2015. For several months, there has been a real challenge for the Parisian jurisdiction regarding the preparation and organization of the trial of the attacks of November 13, 2015. Why? The numbers speak for themselves. 131 deceased victims, more than 400 victims physically injured, and thousands of others psychologically impacted on various crime scenes, Stade de France, Bataclan, terrace of the 10th and 11th arrondissement of Paris. Currently, more than 1,750 of these victims have become civil parties to the proceedings, but this number will undoubtedly change considerably as the trial approaches. As a reminder, 26 foreign or binational victims were killed in these attacks. There are also at least 300 lawyers. There will be approximately 7 months of hearing with 20 accused. So exceptional support measures have been implemented for this trial. The Parisian Victim Support Association, Paris Aide aux Victimes, member of the France Victim Network, has been requested by the National Anti-Terrorism Public Prosecutor's Office to support all the victims and their relatives who will come to attend in the trial in Paris. It is essential to remind that in France, the rights and the support will be the same for all victims who are civil parties to the trial, regardless of their nationality. This is reflected on several levels: the right to participate in the trial, the right to have various costs covered, and also the right to information given to civil parties and to support by the local association Paris Aide aux Victimes. About the participation in the trial, a few words about courtrooms. The trial is scheduled to open on Wednesday, September 8, 2021, before the Paris Assize Court. The hearings should start every day at 12:30 and will run continuously without interruptions. There will be no hearings scheduled on Mondays. The weeks will be very busy otherwise. The trial will therefore be in session for 6 to 8 months every day from Tuesday to Friday from 12:30 onwards. The trial in France is public. Anyone can freely come attend the trial, especially victims, even if they come from another country. There will be interpreters during the trial, mainly speaking English for now. However, the interpretation is planned during the debates, meaning for the exchanges between the victim civil parties and the magistrates, not for the entire trial. For instance, when it is the time for civil parties to intervene, if a foreign victim who do not speak French wishes to talk before the court, it will be possible. The interpreter will translate what the victim says to the magistrates and vice versa. However, for the rest of the trial, we were told there won't be any individual interpreter for the foreign civil parties. Therefore, if victims don't speak French at all, it will be very difficult for them to understand what will be said during trial. Work is currently underway at the Parisian Court of Appeal to better adapt the premises to receive a large number of people. The trial will not be held in the judicial tribunal where the trial of the attacks of January 2015 took place, because there are not enough rooms to accommodate such a large number of civil parties. The main courtroom is currently under construction and should be completed by the end of May 2021. It will have a capacity of 600 people, and we'll have around 550 seats for civil party and lawyers. Particular attention is paid in this room to acoustics, which is essential to follow the debates. The room will be equipped with several screens and sound so that the people seated at the back will not lose any of the exchanges at the bar. There will also be 10 other retransmission rooms in the jurisdictions available to civil parties as a priority, and to anyone wishing to follow the trial, the hearing being public. The subject of courtrooms is a central problem for victims, and there is no truly satisfactory solution that has been found. All victims would like to be in the main room, but it will not be possible. As a result, they may feel that they are relegated to retransmission rooms where the trial is not unfolding before them in person. It will also be difficult for them to communicate with their lawyer when they are not in the same room. So what can be done? We will have to work collectively with lawyers in particular through the creation of a schedule to allow equal access to the main courtroom for each victim when they will be directly concerned by the debates, for example, depending on the seats of the attacks mentioned that day. As with the trial of the attacks of January 2015, the civil parties may not be accompanied in this main room by a member of their family or by a close relative who is not a civil party. This will have to be taken into account, particularly for foreign victims who may feel even more isolated without their loved ones. And now a few words about the internet radio. This law of December 24, 2020 regarding the European Public Prosecutor's Office and specialized criminal justice creates the possibility of a non-interactive audio retransmission of the trial for the civil parties for exceptional trials in France. This is the internet radio system, which means that the civil parties will be able to hear the trial, but not to see it, and will not be able to speak. Only the sound will be broadcast to prevent sensitive images from ending up on social media. So this system will be tested for the first time for the trial of the attacks of November 13, 2015. Two solutions will be possible for the civil parties who wish to attend the trial. Either come physically to the hearings in Paris or follow the trial from their home with an internet radio with an hour delay approximately. Each civil party and their lawyer will have an access code to a dedicated channel to listen to the full proceedings. This necessarily implies that the civil party has an internet connection. Otherwise, it will not work. Each civil party will have a single personal code, which they will have received on request before the beginning of the trial. Giving this personal code to a third party will be liable to criminal prosecution. Users will sign a charter, and the Court of Appeal will be able to track connections. The presiding judge of the Paris Court will have full power over this system. For instance, he may cut the recordings if necessary at his sole discretion in order to guarantee the serenity of the debates and to prevent a disturbance of public order. This system had been requested by victims' associations, considering that it was the best compromise to allow victims to follow the trial remotely over in a very long period, as many victims work and therefore cannot be away for too long. If this solution also partially resolves the difficulties related to the reception capacity of the Paris Court, it will be essential to adapt the methods of support for victims by the associations. Indeed, how will react a civil party who follows the trial alone with the internet radio from their living room, for instance? This system can therefore also be very practical for victims abroad. It prevents them from having to travel to France. However, there are some limits. Via the internet radio, it will not be possible to provide a translation for the debates, which assumes that the victim must therefore understand French. The victims will be alone for these retransmissions through the internet radio. Certain court times can indeed trigger strong emotional reactions, and it is important that all victims can be helped. Psychologists from the association will be present continuously during the trial, but the support will be much more complicated for victims in isolation and lonely, facing a screen without images. Paris Aide aux Victimes will therefore also open a dedicated telephone line related to the internet radio. Psychologists will thus be available to listen to any victim who calls, but above all, if necessary, the connection can be ensured with a network of specialized psychologists, but also with their local association. But to be honest, we do not know yet how this system will be able to work for victims outside of France. We still have to work on this subject. So now about legal expenses. In France, in order to facilitate access to the trial for civil parties, the legislator has provided for a mechanism to cover the costs of the hearing. Civil parties are assimilated to witnesses to cover their expenses relating to the trial, unless the court decides otherwise. This is not a reimbursement of all costs incurred, but a fixed compensation. To benefit from it, the victim must be a party to the proceedings, meaning being a civil party. Otherwise, they will not be reimbursed. All civil parties are concerned, regardless of their nationality. And it is important to note because not all countries have such a system. These fees cover attendance fees, being present at hearings, compensation for loss of salary, transportation costs, and daily subsistence allowance, accommodation, and meal expenses. Civil parties will be required to check in with a badge given to them before the start of the trial every day upon their arrival at court, which will certify that they were present at the trial. Without this, they cannot be reimbursed. The number of victims must be taken into account here again. First of all, victims will have to manage their reservations themselves and pay the legal expenses first to be reimbursed afterwards upon providing supporting documents or according to reimbursement scale. This rule also applies to foreign victims. However, given the number of files, it will take months to the dedicated services of the Paris court to process their request. Furthermore, in France, you can become a civil party at any time, even when the trial has started and until the prosecution's requisition. Therefore, for the victims who will become civil parties at the opening of the hearing, it will take even longer to reimburse their legal expenses. But first, they will have to be declared admissible. This decision will be taken during another hearing, a civil hearing, which will take place well after the end of the criminal trial. To sum up, given the length of the trial, foreign victims who will come to Paris to attend the trial will, in all likelihood, have to advance large sums, travel and hotel costs, and so on, and reimbursing all victims will take time. Additionally, if foreign victims do not have a French bank account, or if they do not have an IBAN number on their bank account references, it will not be possible to reimburse them. Perhaps facilitating modalities could be considered with the help of the victim's home country, but it will have to be done on a case-by-case basis.
So about information of civil parties and accompaniment. As with all these exceptional trials, the Association Paris Aide aux Victimes has been mobilized by the judicial authorities for many months to set up a system to support victims' civil parties during the trial. There is already a lot of work for the association before the trial. Paris Aide aux Victimes has sent a letter to the civil parties in preparation for the trial to find out if they intend to come and attend the hearings in Paris. It is about getting a global overview of victims' attendance of the trial, although of course nothing will be and will ever be set in stone, and victims will be able to change their minds at any time. Paris Aide aux Victimes sent this questionnaire to all victims, including foreign victims whose contacts they had. However, there were only a few returns from foreign victims, mainly from Belgium, Spain, and Germany. 10 civil parties out of the 1,750 have indicated that they would need interpreters during the hearing, which represents 5 different languages. However, more foreign civil parties might need interpreters, as most of them have not answered nor received the questionnaire sent by Paris Aide aux Victimes. The questionnaire has so far been sent twice, in August 2020 and in February 2021, to obtain as many responses as possible. A little over a third of the civil parties responded. Around 20% of the civil parties indicated that they wish to come, and their opinion can, of course, still change at any time. It is important to know that 1,800 victims are currently civil parties, but there are still as many who are not civil parties yet and who could become so even after the opening of the trial, as we told you previously, since French law provides that one can become a civil party at any time until the requisitions of the public prosecutor's office. More than 60% of the civil parties also indicated that they would like a preparatory meeting to be organized beforehand. A visit of the premises before the trial has a reassuring effect on the victims, so they better identify the premises and anticipate the hearings. It will also be the opportunity to give them their badges to enter the court. Given the number of victims, several court meetings and visits will take place during the summer, organized with Paris Aide aux Victimes. Foreign victims will also be able to take part in these visits if they want to. However, them traveling for this reason will undoubtedly be much more difficult to organize, and they will have to bear their travel expenses. Paris Aide aux Victimes has also wrote a civil parties vademecum, along with the services of the Court of Appeal. These documents contains a certain amount of practical information for civil parties, like a map of the tribunal, where to register at the beginning of the trial upon arrival at the court, information on the reimbursement of legal expenses, information on requests for legal aid, and so on. Finally, it provides explanations on the conduct of a trial for a terrorist attack and the role of the different parties who will be present. It has been disseminated to victim support associations, to victims associations, to lawyers, and is intended to be handed over to as many civil parties as possible before the trial, so that they can anticipate all the practical and legal aspects of their participation in the hearings. The vademecum may be translated in English, hopefully. All these measures are fully valid for foreign victims, and documents will be translated, and they will be able to benefit from Paris Aide aux Victimes support and assistance before and during the trial. During the trial, Paris Aide aux Victimes will indeed deploy a support system for civil parties that will be adaptable. So receptionists, jurists, and psychologists will be constantly involved. Their number will vary and will be adjusted according to the number of civil parties present at all phases of the trial. A support system that is mobile. Teams will rotate continuously between all courtrooms, main room and retransmission rooms, and support rooms dedicated to victims. This will allow them to hear the proceedings at the same time as the victims if they have any questions afterwards. The purpose of their presence outside the courtroom is to ensure a presence for victims who would feel that it is too difficult for them to follow the proceedings, for instance, and also to offer psychological support by the association. And so this support system will also be identifiable. The victim support team will wear Paris Aide aux Victimes badge and jackets with their name on it so that victims can identify and talk to them more easily. They will also be easily reachable. Paris Aide aux Victimes has opened a special telephone line and email for many months, which will also be accessible during the trial. A support system will also be offered for victims who will follow the trial via the internet radio. Moreover, the Paris Aide aux Victimes team, who will be present on site during the trial to support victims, will be composed of victim support workers who can speak English, Italian, German, and Spanish. Paris Aide aux Victimes will be there as a facilitator for victims, including for foreign victims, and will help them as best as they can. Really quickly, a final word about the victims' lawyers, and after that I will conclude. So the civil parties' lawyers must also adapt to this extraordinary trial and organize themselves collectively. This also applies to lawyers of foreign victims, who will play an essential role in liaising with their clients. So to conclude, the trial of the attacks of November 13, 2015 will be a real challenge in terms of ensuring that foreign victims are properly taken into consideration due to their number, the diversity of nationalities, and the length of the trial, and so on. The trial of the attack in Nice will then take place shortly, with even more foreign victims, hence the importance of thinking and organizing things as well as possible. The rights of foreign victims must be respected just as much as national victims. Otherwise, they might find themselves deprived of a part of their judicial history, which can make their resilience more difficult afterwards. The trial is generally expected but a complex step for victims. It is undoubtedly more so for foreign victims due to the amount of unknown factors, no understanding of the language, no familiarization with the legal system, remoteness of their usual environment, etc. It is up to us, public authorities, associations, and other actors to ensure collectively that they can also experience this moment as best as possible. With regards to the trial of the terrorist attacks on November 13, 2015, Paris Aide aux Victimes suggests that a liaison be made with our European colleagues, members of Victim Support Europe, to identify all questions that arise for foreign victims who are civil parties. We will then relay these questions to Paris Aide aux Victimes to be raised to the Court of Appeal in Paris. In order to harmonize responses to victims of attacks abroad, it seems fundamental to change things, perhaps even at a European level, so that victims who wish to attend the trial that concerns them should have this possibility without this causing them financial problems or any other issue. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Isabelle and Pauline. This is always a pleasure to hear about the amazing work that you're doing. And your team is always also present for the victims, and it's much appreciated. I'll just ask Isabelle to stop sharing the screen so we can have a view also of Pat for the Q&A session. Let me just do this. No, this is not what I wanted to do. Sorry, Lieselot, can you please make the speakers spotlight? Thank you. So I now open the floor for questions. So we have a few participants who joined us. If there are any questions, I'm checking the chat, but I don't see any. Don't hesitate to ask your questions in the chat, or you can also take the floor directly if you have any. I'll just let you think of questions, and in the meantime, I will ask some questions to our speakers. I have a first questions, and Pauline actually just touched upon it in your last slide about the cooperation with other victim support organizations in Europe. So it's also a question for you, Pat. Are you also in contact with other support organizations in the country where the victims come from? You mentioned that you don't, that ITAS doesn't provide emotional support directly to victims, but is there this collaboration with other organizations in the different countries?
Well, we would have a list of organizations that we would refer people to from time to time. In other words, we'd give them the details of those organizations and pass those details on, obviously, to the victim. We don't collaborate largely. I kind of would have focused a lot on my presentation in terms of the immediate practical support that we give, and it is very much the immediate side of things. It's, you know, what's happening right now in the 24 hours, 48 hours that we're dealing with you. What kind of supports do you need? We focus very much on that. Again, the type of crime that we tend to deal with, the type of clients that we have, they tend to be, I suppose, 60 to 80% of the people we see are very much the low-level robbery or low-level theft where a wallet is missing or something like that. In terms of the trauma and that, I mentioned a few cases that we would have dealt with that would have been serious assault, sexual assault, that type of thing. There's a number of other organizations that we deal with within either Ireland or within the police force here. There's the Garda Victim Services organization, and they have qualified people who interview victims of serious assault, and they do it in such a way, it's done very much in a professional kind of basis. And in the event, say, that a trial kind of comes up and somebody is brought to Ireland for the purposes of that trial, it's actually Garda Victim Services who work around the victim in terms of support that they may need, whether it's counselling or that type of thing. So we would have a list of organizations throughout Europe, and you'd probably be familiar with a lot of the people on that list yourselves. But we would refer people, or we would give them details, but we don't make appointments. It's up to the person themselves. Our kind of thing as well, it's kind of, I suppose you could make the excuse that it's covered by GDPR, but we don't really want to be in a position that we're passing on other people's details to a third party, especially a third party that's outside of the jurisdiction. If crime is reported to the police here, and the bulk of our kind of stuff comes through the police, like the tourist organizations will know about us, but they'll tell the victim to report the incident to the police in the first instance, and then they come to us, with a form called an ITAS-1, which is a copy of the report to the police. And once we get that, we deem it as a referral from the police, no matter where they've heard about us or whatever the kind of situation is. It's a referral from the police. So we're very wary of, we're not a big organization, and if we had what was deemed a data breach under GDPR, it would shut us down. So we're very wary of, we'll give people the information and it's up to them to make the decision. We won't kind of ring up and say, how you doing? I've got Mary Smith or John Smith here and they need the following. It's not our job, and it's very much, let's put it this way, it's just something we would not do. We won't. It's different if it comes to the embassy and the person is in front of us and we're referring them there, or we're dealing with an airline on their behalf. We have consent to do that kind of thing. The answer to the question, I suppose, in a nutshell, is we tend not to, but we will facilitate them if they request that. We'll find out all the information they need to make that decision on their own.
Thank you, Pat. And for Pauline and Isabel, I heard. I hope also Victim Support Europe is helping you in this way of connecting with other European organizations. How do you see this happening for this particular trial now?
Well, this is something that we have to see with you, how to coordinate everything, because so far we're still gathering all of the information of how the trial is going to unfold, because it's going to start in the beginning of September of this year, and not everything is already finalized. Mm. So on this point, we still have to check with you how to best organize this solicitation of all the victim support members who might be impacted because they have victims in their home country who were victims of these attacks. So we have to, organize things with you.
Of course, and we'll be happy to support you in this. I'm asking again if there are any questions from the participants.
Thought no. Michael showed up to ask a question, but now he disappeared.
Ah. Okay.
I don't know if it's an appropriate question to ask, if France victims have benefited already of using our referral system.
Yes, I was about to say your referral system is perfect for us, because we have a couple solicitations per month about foreign victims, so it proved really efficient to further the support that they started having in our country to when they go home. I'm not sure whether this is going to be the best way to tackle the victims of terrorism for these attacks, to let them know about the information. I don't know if it's going to be the most efficient way to get in touch with the members, or if we should send something globally or collectively and not individually. I don't really know, or at least global information, and then focus on dedicated communication towards a specific member through the referral system. But it's been greatly effective and efficient for us, and thank you for setting that up.
Thank you, Pauline. And I think France Victim is one of the organizations using it the most. So we appreciate also, and we are glad that it is useful also for our members.
It is very and it's working really well, because we've heard back from some of the victims saying that they were actually in touch with the associations and organizations back home. So
that's great.
Yep.
And I have another more practical questions. Of course, the language issue is a big challenge for these foreign victims. Pauline, you mentioned that your staff, or the staff at Paris Aide aux Victimes, will speak different language. Did you have to hire new people to look for people who speak this particular language, or there were already staff within Paris Aide aux Victimes who were speaking this language? And also for Pat, how is your team dealing with the different languages? Are you also in contact with interpreters, for example, to be able to speak with the different victims that come to you?
You want me to go first? Okay, we have a number of staff members who are fluent in Spanish, French, and German. And I mean, it's basically, we have a bank of volunteers who kind of speak a number of other languages that, you know, we would have available to us. Like Russian has become a kind of a thing that we would have needed over the last, well, not this year, obviously, but in 2019 and going back. And we also use a company called Language Line Solutions. It's basically a telephone service. So we put a speaker, or we put a phone on speaker between the our advocate and the client, and we use the Language Line Solutions to do the translation back and forth. But the bulk of it, really, to be honest, is either a staff member. Like, if I was to look at the breakdown of languages in our cases, German, French, and Spanish would probably make up about 70% of them. And we would probably have access to a staff member who may or may not be in the office at the time. And we would have a bank of volunteers then for a number of other languages. And the third line of defense, if you want to put it that way, would be using Language Line Solutions. And, you know, why would they be the third line? Well, they cost us money. And that's always a problem. And, you know, as I think I may have mentioned in the presentation, we don't have a massive budget or anything like that. We can't kind of call on the United Nations for a bank of translators when we need them at 5 o'clock on a Thursday evening or anything like that. So that's how we would tend to deal with it, yeah.
Thank you. And how is it going in France Victim?
For this trial specifically, Paris Aide aux Victimes has hired more people to have a bigger team to cover all the needs of all the victims that will be present during the trial. And when hiring, they took the language skills into consideration. So they would have people who would be able to speak different languages present at the tribunal.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions from the participants? You explained everything so well. There is no need for further information. Pat, maybe another question is, you mentioned that you are present in police station, and if I imagine that most of the people would first go to the police to report the crime, but if not, how can they learn about your organization?
Yeah, that's the perennial kind of question when we discuss stuff internally. We're just to explain a little bit about our funding and that we're funded by the Department of Justice. Largely, we're funded by the state. About 80% of our funding comes from the Department of Justice, Department of Tourism, an organisation called Fáilte Ireland, which is the tourism marketing body, and then the remainder of our funding tends to come from hotel, the Hotel Federation and the Restaurants Association of Ireland. And partly the reason that Fáilte Ireland pay us money and the Department of Tourism pay us money is they want us to do what we do, but they don't obviously want us to put large billboards in Dublin Airport, 100 feet by 100 feet, saying, hey, if you're mugged, call this number, because it gives the wrong impression of the country. So we have to do it on a very low level. We are very much in contact with the members of the organizations like the Hotel Federation, the guest house operators and all of that. And we send out various kind of bits and pieces. One of them I have in my hand here. It's basically safety tips for tourists. And they come in boxes of 50 or whatever, and we try and get them positioned in every reception desk in the country, in every guest house, and where you sign in or whatever, where you sign the guest book. And we hope that kind of people take them with us. But in doing all of that, by sending these tips out, it kind of highlights the fact that we are available and that people can contact us. So a bed and breakfast operator or a hotel receptionist or something like that will maybe remember that ITAS is kind of a thing. We promote ourselves within the Gardaí then as well. We work with there's an organisation called CPD, which is Career Professional Development within the police force. And they run basically every element of training within the Garda force, whether it's driving cars or whether it's, initial training and so on. And usually they operate with the initial, when they take in new recruits, they deal with them in teams of 15. So there's 15 to a class. So we make it a job that we address those 15 people in every training group. So that might happen, it depends really on the recruit intake, but it could mean, you could do maybe 10 of those a year, or you could do 60 or 70 of those a year with the new classes of recruits. So we promote ourselves within the hotels industry. We're involved with Free Now, the taxi service. I think you guys will be familiar with that in Germany, France, Brussels, and so on, or in Belgium and so on. And again, they're taxi drivers. We make a point of educating them as to what we do and where we are, and if it's a tourist kind of thing. And our tourists here are pretty good. They're pretty clued in, and they're pretty, I would say, kind of cases where stuff has actually been lost as opposed to been stolen, and it's just stuff left in taxis and that, and we'll get phone calls from them. We promote ourselves with the council. The local authority, the municipal authority in Dublin is Dublin City Council, and again, they know who we are. We educate them on a regular basis as to what we do with new people, new hires, and so on, and we ensure that in the event that something, a lot of times, as I said, stuff is actually lost more so than stolen. So if they find stuff, they know automatically where to go, and they'll contact us maybe often before they leave it into the police lost property office. And if we have a record of a passport or whatever on a case, we'll kind of get in contact with that person and say, look, this was found and it was handed in to us. So our stuff is pretty low level. As I said, we can't go on TV and radio saying, 30-minute or 30-second or 60-second ads. We can't do the billboards in the airport. And we're kind of precluded from that because obviously, when we talk about crime here, we would deal with a lot of cases in a year. We could see maybe 1,000 people a year. But at the end of the day, of the numbers that come here, like population of Ireland is about 4.8 million, 4.9 million, somewhere in that kind of ballpark. And we probably get about 7 or 8 million tourists a year. So if we see 1,000 of them, it's still not a high percentage of, a lot of people come through Ireland, let's say, unscathed. So from a promotion point of view, you can see the point of Fáilte Ireland. And as I said, our funding is kind of coming from them. So we have to, and to be honest, it wouldn't be a good look. It wouldn't be a good idea for us to do the stuff that I outlined, like the billboards or so that's basically what we do.
Thank you very much, Pat. I have a last question. I'm looking at the time. Maybe we have time for a last question to Pauline and Isabel. We hear a lot about vicarious trauma for support workers. Can you tell us a bit more about what is provided to the support workers who will be with the victim during the trials to support them?
So there are modalities about support for the Parisian team who will be effective. For instance, there will be weekly supervision for teams, and each evening, the team has also the possibility to speak with the director of the Parisian Association. She's also psychologist, and she can help if there were hard moments to help the team to support that. Yes, but it is very important to mention that because we paid attention about that to be organized by our local association, because when it doesn't work for the professional team, it will be very difficult to give a professional and efficient support to civil parties.
Exactly, and I'm sure that you will do an amazing work there. Thank you so much. I don't see any questions in the chat. My colleague Liselott has just shared a link with you. It's a survey for the participants of the conference and the speakers. If you can answer it, and it give us some insight of how what did you think about the conference, its organization, the topics, etc. So if there are no questions from the chat, last chance to ask questions. I see Michael is raising his hand. Michael, please.
Hopefully you can hear me.
Yes.
Just a comment in relation to what Pat had to say. Here in Australia, we had a series of very horrific murders involving backpackers, and for example, in one incident, there was a backpacker from Germany, one from Italy, one from Brazil, as well as an Australian, just involved in one criminal incident. And the point that Pat made is that the tourist industry didn't want the police and others to focus on the issue of the crime, because the tourist industry in Australia is so important. But at the same time, we had to find ways of countering the social media and working through what we would do. So one of the things that happened was that while I was still then serving, I'm retired now, but serving as the Commissioner for Victims' Rights, is that we worked with the police and the backpacker industry to produce a series of pamphlets and artwork and other things which would be put into the backpacker institutions. We shifted the debate from being about the dangers to what can be done to mitigate the risks. Like, it's a slightly different way, and the challenge is how you do that in a manner that's not victim blaming. So there was a lot that Pat had to say in terms of the tourist industry and the vested interests, and how as a victim organisation you often find yourself caught in both in the tension of that dynamic and having to find remedies. So, and congratulations to both France Victims and Pat for your presentations. They were very informative. So I'm glad I was able to join you from down under.
Yeah, just if I can cut in there, I don't really want to kind of give the impression that, you know, the tourist industry want to sweep everything under the carpet or anything like that. They certainly don't. But I suppose there's a fine line you can, between, as I said, like, I mean, do we put up, 100-foot by 200-foot posters in the airport? We kind of, it's not we get around it. Like, I mean, the tourist industry are very supportive of what we do. And I mentioned these tourist tips or whatever, they're in 4 languages and they're handed out at hotels and hostels and all the backpackers places as well. Now, we haven't had, we've had one in about 25, 26 years, we've had one really serious case of assault, which didn't result in death that we would have been involved in. And it's a guy called Guido Nazzi. He's an Italian national. And he was the victim of a horrific assault here in Ireland back around 1996, I think it was. And he received a terrible beating. He just happened to be in the wrong part of town at the wrong time. And as a result of that, he was in a coma here in Ireland for about 6 months. And then he was repatriated back to Italy. But like, the guy was a young student when he came here. And I met him 2 years ago. He was over here for an event that we had with the President of Ireland. And, his life has been ruined basically by that incident. And it got a lot of profile over here. It got a lot of media attention. Even when he came back 2 years ago, or 3 years ago, actually, sorry, I keep forgetting that last year was actually a year at all. But he would have been the victim of a horrendous crime, and there was no attempt whatsoever to hide that. But I suppose when you look at the figures, the number of cases that we see in a year, the number of tourist-related crimes or visitor-related crimes are really, really low versus the overall crime numbers, and they're low as a proportion of our population and as a proportion of the amount of people that actually visit the country. I would consider Ireland one of the safest countries in the world. Like, I mean, we do have stuff. We have gang-related violence, but the gang-related kind of stuff tends to stay in its own area. Like, it's a gang versus gang shootings or that type of thing going on. Like, having said that, like, that doesn't take away from the fact that, yeah, we do have crime. So it's kind of trying to find that balance between, here's a service that can do this, this, and this for you. We really don't want to frighten you to the extent that you're not going to bother coming to use the service, even in the event that you need it. That's, I suppose, where we are. And, when I say we get some funding from Fáilte Ireland and from the Department of Tourism, like, they are funding us to provide the service that we provide to the unfortunate victims of crime who happen to be visitors to the country. And I mentioned, like, a lot of our people are tourists. The other kind of demographic within that would be Ireland attracts a lot of English students, students that come here to learn English for 6 month or 8 month periods, and sometimes they come for 3 8-month periods and spend 2 years here. And there are people we would deal with as well, because in situations where they are the victim of theft, oftentimes they lose their residency permit, and that's quite expensive to replace, and we work with them to get that replaced free of charge. I suppose we're anxious to attract those kind of people. We're anxious, Ireland as a country, I mean, is anxious to attract the students and also the tourists. And there is a fine line between, frightening people off and kind of having a completely laissez-faire attitude to the whole thing,
Yes, I concur. And might I add, I think it's important that we look after the people who do the work. So I think there's a lot of value in what Pauline had to say. And certainly that's my experience here. As a manager, you not only have to manage the problem in terms of the crime and the messages, but you also have to remember that the people that you're asking to do the work, there's a toll on them as well. And one has a responsibility towards those people. So thank you, both of you, or well, all three of you.
Thank you, Michael. I think you said the conclusion to this event. It's important to take care also of the staff in order to ensure that the victims receive the appropriate support. I would like to thank you, Pat, Pauline, and Isabel, very much. It was really much appreciated, and you provided a really interesting and informative presentation. I remind everyone that the presentation will be available to review. They've all been, the other side events have all been recorded, so feel free to have a look at them. They'll be available in a few days or weeks, I suppose. Thank you very much again. Have a great evening, and this is the end of VSE annual conference. Thank you very much.